Welcome to the Veganuary Podcast, the podcast that helps you to try a vegan diet. It's stuffed full of hints and tips for anyone who wants to eat more plants.
All of Veganuary's resources are free, and the podcast is free from ads too. But Veganuary is a charity, so if you like what we do, please consider making a donation at veganuary.com/donate.
Hello, Wendy. Welcome to Veganuary 2026.
We are back.
So I'm going to start off by talking about the most or least vegan thing that's happened to me. Well, do you know, I'm going back a little while now because I moved house in the summer. We've got a bigger kitchen. And so we've invested in an air fryer. And I suppose, I know that's not an exclusively vegan thing, but I'm like obsessed. It has unlocked a whole new world of culinary excitement for me. I really, really like cooking tofu you know how tofu sometimes it's a bit difficult to get like crispy and nice texture sometimes. I find if you do it for a few minutes in the air fryer first before you toss it in a curry or whatever, perfect. So yeah, that's some exciting news that's happened to me in the past year.
Okay, so you're drinking the air fryer Kool-Aid. This is a thing that I haven't jumped on yet, but you're saying I should.
Chips, fries, great. Great for fries. Yeah, they're my two favorite things that I'm cooking in there.
All right, sold.
Yep.
I think it's time.
And we would love to hear from you, our listeners. So if you have any like funny vegan anecdotes of like vegan fails or real cliche vegan things that have happened to you, we'd love to hear from you. Please email us at podcast@veganuary.com. So it's the start of a new year, Wendy. It's January. We've launched a new Veganuary campaign and we're calling it New Year, Same You. I wondered if you could tell everyone a little bit about it.
Yeah, so the idea for this campaign started earlier last year when we started to notice a bit of resolution fatigue, right? We started to notice that most resolutions are aimed at telling you that you're not good enough. And every January, we're hit with these same tired messages like you have to fix yourself, you have to be someone different, you have to change everything. And we also put out a study that showed that about 18% of US adults surveyed made a resolution last year compared to 38% in 2024. And half of those people failed before the year was through. So there's a big resolution weariness. And in January, we started to wonder, what if you didn't need to reinvent yourself? What if it's less about changing and more about returning to who you already are? So this January, Veganuary is flipping the script and leaving the resolution pressure behind. Instead of urging people to become a new version of themselves, our New Year, Same You campaign celebrates who people already are. There's no reinvention, there's no pressure. We're just giving them simple, satisfying swaps that align with the things they already care about. And we're going to bring this campaign to life through feel-good PSAs, which you might have already seen out there in the world, that spotlight the many different motivations for trying vegan. So whether someone is a foodie or a fitness buff or an animal lover or a champion for the planet, Veganuary is going to meet them where they are and invite them to take part on their own terms.
Excellent. Very well summarized. I love it because I hate New Year's resolutions. I think I find them quite silly, and I've never stuck to one. So I do understand the resolution fatigue. And coming up shortly, we're going to you interviewed Ed Winters, Earthling Ed, and I was doing some background research on Ed, and I thought it was really interesting that he talked about having a moment where he decided to go vegan. I think he saw some chickens being transported in a truck. I don't know if you spoke to him about this in the interview, Wendy. But that sort of scales fell from his eyes, and he thought, what I eat doesn't align with the way that I think and I feel about the world. And it's just that, isn't it? It's not about changing who we are. It's just about trying to find ways that we can be more centered, I guess, in the way that we eat and eat in a way that's more consistent with what we believe.
Exactly. I think most people are already more vegan in their values than they realize.
Perfect. Well, I think that is a great segue into your interview with Ed Winters with Earthling Ed. I wasn't available that day, so you're just going to hear Wendy's voice and Ed's voice.
Welcome to the podcast, Ed.
Thank you so much for having me. I very much appreciate it.
So we are big foodies over here at Veganuary, and we always like to start our episodes with a food question. So tell us about your dream vegan meal.
It's actually quite a tricky question. I think instinctively I want to go for something pasta-based. I love pasta. And I think probably something either a lasagna or a spaghetti bolognese with garlic bread. And I think the garlic bread's the key thing. I'm absolute sucker for good garlic bread. So I think probably a lasagna with garlic bread.
I love it. You're a carbs guy.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, we would love to hear a little bit more about your journey to activism. I'm sure it's a story that you tell often, but I've read that the catalyst was a BBC article you read back in 2014. So let's start there. Tell us your story.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, yeah, you're right. May 2014, there was an article on the BBC, and the headline was "Hundreds of Chickens Killed in M62 Lorry Crash." So this truck, it was carrying about 6,500 chickens, had crashed on the way to a slaughterhouse in England. And I clicked on the article because the headline just sort of piqued my interest. I'm like, hundreds of chickens killed in a crash on the road. What's going on here? So I clicked on it, and I was reading about these birds who had been killed in this truck crash. There were hundreds more who had broken bones, broken wings. They were suffering. They were being crushed by the truck and by the crates they were in. And I just realized that I was empathizing with chickens, which I'd never done before. I'd never really considered chickens. Who cares about chickens, right? But I was reading this article and I was empathizing with them and feeling sorry for them. But in my fridge were the remains of a KFC, a fried chicken meal, because fried chicken was my favorite food before I stopped eating animals. So I'm feeling sorry for chickens, but my actions and my choices are the reason why they're in that truck going to the slaughterhouse to begin with. And what was quite interesting is I sort of had to work out whether or not, if they'd made it to the slaughterhouse, that would have even been better for the chickens. You know, would you rather be killed instantly in a truck crash, or would you rather be taken to a slaughterhouse, hung upside down, dragged through an electrified water bath, have your throat cut? You know, there's just so many horrible things that happen in a slaughterhouse. And you just think, I'm not sure if it would have even been better for them to reach where they were meant to be going. But if I'm feeling sorry for them in this crash, why wouldn't I feel sorry for them if they reached the slaughterhouse? So that led me on this sort of this journey of reflecting on my view of animals, what I paid for. I went vegetarian as a consequence of that article. And then about 8 months or so later, I took the plunge and went vegan because of a documentary called Earthlings. So that was kind of my roadmap to veganism, so to speak. And then after about 9 months there or thereabouts of being vegan, I started engaging with sort of vegan content creators, watching what people were doing, and started to get a bit more passionate about advocating for veganism. And I just started to feel that I didn't just want to be vegan, I wanted to do something about it. And I had a camera. I studied film at university, so I kind of knew how to use a camera and how to sort of edit videos basically and such. And so I thought I'll just try filming some videos at home, see how it goes. And I remember the first few videos I filmed were absolutely terrible. They were so bad. I'm sweating and my hands are all clammy and I'm really nervous and I'm just struggling to remember what I'm going to say. But I just kept going and started doing things that I found a little bit easier and a bit more natural. And it kind of grew from there, really. And I started doing some public speaking and such. But that sort of started early 2016, those first few uploads. And then from there, I've just been trying to expand and do different things and keep building on that ever since, really.
Yeah, how incredible that chickens were a big part of your story. I love chickens. I used to have rescue chickens, but they're not typically the first animal someone feels a connection with or an empathy for. So that's really incredible.
Yeah, it is interesting. Chickens and then obviously fish are the ones we feel the least empathy for. But you're right, chickens are the ones we sort of are quite good at ignoring. You know, pigs and cattle, we can kind of empathize with a little easier, although we don't do that as much as we should. But with chickens, I think because they are, again, a little bit more different from us than pigs and cattle and mammals, we just find it a little bit harder sometimes to consider who they are and why they matter. And I think you're right. Maybe that entry point with chickens made it easier for me to sort of expand from that point, because once you acknowledge the sentience of chickens and you kind of start to feel empathy for them and understand that they deserve compassion and consideration and such, yeah, maybe that made it a little bit easier for me to engage with all those other species that we traditionally find it a little bit easier to empathize with.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So what I find really beautiful and really striking about your approach is how calm and compassionate your conversations are, even when you're discussing some pretty heated topics. Is that just who you are, or is that an approach you've had to cultivate over the years?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think I don't like confrontation. I'm not the sort of person who would enjoy the prospect of going up to someone and arguing and shouting and sort of getting into a bit of a war of words. That isn't something that I think naturally resonates with who I want to be and who I am. But also at the same time, when I first started advocating, that passion came out in a way that I think was quite unproductive at times. And I think that's the thing. As activists, we're all deeply passionate, and part of that passion is frustration and anger at the system. You know, the system is horrible. It's terrible. It's immoral. It's unjust. It causes suffering, climate degradation. It uses antibiotics. It causes bird flu and swine flu. The system of animal farming that we have on this planet is an absolute disaster for so many reasons. And I think it's only natural that we're going to feel frustrated and angry at that system. And so sometimes that creates passion within us that we then use to become activists. But what happens is we allow those more negative emotions, or those ones that are fueling our passion, to sort of spill out of us. And then what happens is we become angry at the person we're speaking to, or frustrated with the individual we're trying to persuade to change their lifestyles. And that's wholly unproductive. Because anger at the system isn't the same as anger at the consumer, the everyday person. But when I first started, I think sometimes that did happen for me. I'd go and speak with someone and I wouldn't listen to them. I'd raise my voice. My body language would be quite hostile, maybe. The language I used would be quite accusatory, judgmental. And at the beginning, when I first started speaking with non-vegans, I started having sort of negative responses from them. The conversations would end, or the debates would end, and people would seem annoyed at me. They didn't seem open or receptive. Sometimes they were. I remember one conversation I had, the person who I'd been speaking with came back and said, "I'm really unhappy with what you said." And that was a bit of a turning point for me, because if I'm trying to convince people to change their lifestyles, or to at least begin to agree with the way, the principles of veganism, agree with those principles, but people are coming up to me afterwards and saying, "I don't like what you said," then I've ultimately failed in that job. And if I'm an activist, but I'm failing to do what I'm supposed to be doing, then I shouldn't have these conversations, or ultimately I should try and approach them differently. And I just started to sort of connect with a little bit more of who I was and sort of the way that I like to speak with people generally. And I do think that it's really important that we have empathy and understanding for the people we speak with. I wasn't a bad person before I was vegan. I think I was a good person mostly, apart from certain things. I don't think I was an evil or immoral person necessarily. I was just unaware or ignorant of something. And it's not the fault of someone if they're ignorant of something they've never been taught or never been showed or never had the space to think about. And I think that if we really want to convince people and change people's minds, we have to understand their behavior. We have to show respect and compassion to them. And I think through that, we're ultimately more effective at changing their hearts and minds. And no one wants to be told how they should be living. And I think the thing about veganism and the way I try to approach my advocacy is I don't try and approach it from the perspective of trying to convince someone of what I believe. I try and approach it from the perspective of encouraging them to believe that their values probably already align in some way with the principles of veganism. Because everyone cares about animals on some level. Everyone says they're against animal cruelty. And so ultimately, if we can acknowledge that within these people, we can start to reveal to them that their principles are probably more in alignment with veganism than they ultimately currently realize. So it's about just trying to encourage people to think more critically, not trying to wear them down in a war of attrition until they reluctantly agree with us because they feel like they've been forced to agree with us, which I don't think creates sustainable long-term change. But it is a process. It's, we're always learning, always growing as activists. Sometimes we make mistakes. Sometimes we could do things differently. Sometimes we could have used better words, better language, conveyed our views in a more effective way. It's just a process of learning and growing. And I enjoy that side of it as well.
Definitely. And I think we're not even just up against this lack of information or people having not been exposed to this, but there's an active dismantling of disinformation, right? Like people have really been taught otherwise their entire lives. So I think a lot of gentleness and compassion is warranted. So a lot of the listeners of this podcast are Veganuary participants who are pretty new vegans or trying it out for the first time. And you mentioned earlier that in the early days when you were feeling that initial fire and passion, that's when sometimes things went astray. And likewise, I alienated many people in my first few years as a vegan because it just felt like the house was on fire and I wanted everyone to know. So what tips would you give anyone who's new to this and starting to have these conversations and wants to embody some of the calm and compassion that you bring to the table?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is to be compassionate to ourselves. If we do get annoyed, we do get upset, we do get frustrated, we shouldn't then shame ourselves for that. We shouldn't sort of say, oh, I'm a bad advocate, I'm a bad vegan, I shouldn't do this, I shouldn't do that. I think we should be compassionate, understand why this sometimes happens or why we might feel this way. And actually those reasons why are wholly justifiable because of all the things I mentioned earlier about the problem and the scale of it and as you so correctly say, the disinformation campaigns that exist. So I think having a bit of compassion for ourselves is important in that regard. And then it's about, I think, listening to people and being educated as much as possible to respond to what people's worries and concerns are. I think it's quite normal to go vegan, try to convince your friends and family, and then they will say things like, what about protein? What about B12? Does tofu feminize men? Isn't soy farming destroying the Amazon rainforest? All of these, shouldn't I buy local meat? There are sort of an array of sort of maybe common responses that people might have. And they may be responses that we had before we made the change. So I think just maybe having a response at your disposal for some of the most common things that people might say can go a long way. And then listening to people is really helpful because often when people make arguments against us, those arguments aren't trying to be antagonistic or they're not trying to be rude necessarily. Some of the things that people say might seem a bit condescending or patronizing or rude, but that doesn't mean that they mean them to be. For example, when I first went vegan, I told my mum, I sent her an email with some links so that she could see some of the things that I'd been engaging with. And she'd replied saying, basically she's worried about protein and synthetic protein, and she was worried I wasn't going to be healthy. But that didn't come from a bad place. She was worried about me. I've made a diet change, and she wants me to be healthy. And so she's worried that maybe I'm not going to be healthy. I could get annoyed at that and upset and go, oh, protein's so easy to get on a plant-based diet. I can't believe my mum doesn't trust me. It's so patronizing. I'm an adult. I can make my own decisions. All of these sort of things I could say to try and, rile myself up. But ultimately, it comes from a kind place. So I think just trying to understand people's intentions, motivations, listening to people, giving them sort of helpful responses in return, all of those things can be very, very helpful. And also, we might want to convince people to go vegan, but the likelihood that we're going to do that in one conversation or one interaction is extremely small. I mean, you might be extremely lucky and have incredibly open-minded parents and friends and family members, and they might have one conversation with you and join you on this journey, and you create one big happy vegan family, right? But the chances are that's probably not going to happen. You'll probably have a conversation, it might not go that well, and then it becomes a little bit tense maybe, and you become a little bit concerned about how to approach it next time. So I think that the role of advocates in this regard, or just people who want to inspire others, is to not think about a task to, around changing someone's entire worldview in 20 minutes, but can we just keep nudging them in that direction? Can we just ensure that if we do have a 10, 15 minute, 20 minute conversation with someone, rather than the goal being make them go vegan, the goal is just make them feel more understanding of what veganism is, make them feel more receptive towards veganism. They don't have to agree with us, but if we can leave that conversation at least with the view that the person we've been speaking with understands our viewpoint better or has a deeper appreciation of our viewpoint, I think that goes a long, long way. And it's just over time being patient, just sort of building up these conversations, maybe cooking some vegan food for your non-vegan family members, maybe buying in a plant milk for them to try themselves. These small little gestures can be incredibly helpful and very thoughtful. Can you offer to take someone out for a vegan meal? Just little things can go a long way. And I think just simplifying our advocacy, simplifying the day-to-day experience of being vegan, of being an advocate, just makes it more manageable and bearable. Otherwise, we put these heavy expectations on our shoulders, which can be really hard to meet, and that can ultimately lead to us becoming demoralized in the long run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. That's fantastic advice. Thanks so much for sharing.
Oh, thank you.
I'd love to talk a little bit about your new book, which is called How to Go and Stay Vegan. Now, first of all, Veganuary had a book that came out 2017 or so called How to Go Vegan. So, shots fired?
No, certainly not. No, it's a companion book.
No, I just had to pick on you a little bit. But what were you seeing in the world that made you think people need this guide now?
Well, I think that the How to Go Vegan aspect of the book covers things like food, and it covers some of those practical elements. But I also wanted to go a little bit deeper, so it goes into many of the different practical elements of what it means to be vegan. So I look at some of the misinformation around clothing, certain vegan-friendly fabrics, some of the misinformation around entertainment environments like zoos, for example. Delve into some of those more less well understood topics. Even when we make the change to veganism, we might not think, well, why are zoos bad? Aren't they doing conservation work? Or isn't leather better than vegan leather because vegan leather is made from plastic, and isn't that more harmful? These kinds of questions that we might have even once we've made the change to vegan, or eating a plant-based diet. So I wanted to sort of delve into some of those things, or into all of those different things. But I also speak about the psychology of behavior change. Not just how do we approach the change to vegan, but how do we sort of approach this idea of changing our behaviors in general? What are some sort of ways of approaching it? How do we sort of look at shame and guilt and action and inaction and apathy and empathy? And how do we sort of approach all of these different ideas? And what does that mean for us as a person, not just someone who's becoming vegan? And ultimately, the idea of staying vegan came from this sort of awareness, I suppose, that there's a lot of conversation online about people stopping being vegan, people becoming ex-vegans, companies no longer stocking products because there's no longer any demand for plant-based food. And while I think a lot of that is sort of sensationalist and doesn't truly represent the state of the vegan community, I think it's a lot more complex and nuanced than some of those headlines make out, or some of those viral videos might suggest. There is obviously a thing where people do stop being vegan. And some of those reasons might be because of concerns around health. They might be reasons around practicality, feeling inconvenient. It might be because they start to get worn down by the sort of push and pull of being vegan in a non-vegan world, where you're proud of yourself for making a change, but you constantly feel like you're being battled against by this world that doesn't yet agree with you. So there's a lot of complex reasons why people go vegan, but they might struggle in the long run. And I wanted to kind of sort of approach that head on, so that if someone does sort of have a moment where they become a little bit unsure, or they lose some of that commitment or determination, they can sort of understand why. Because it can be a bit scary. Maybe you've been vegan for 18 months and you see a video online and it's talking about how vegans don't get enough B12, or as someone that said that they were vegan for 5 years and they ended up with this problem or that problem. And even though you might be like, well, I don't know if I should trust that person, or was that person eating healthy, or was that person really properly vegan? It can still sort of create a bit of doubt in your mind. And it's that doubt that can gnaw away at people. And I think the more you're exposed to these messages of doubt, the more it can start to get under your skin. And all of a sudden you start to lose that connection and determination for what it means to be a vegan, because you've been bombarded with these sort of messages of doubt. But I think it's about, can we ground ourselves in knowledge and rationality, and can we sort of see through some of these communications? Can we see through some of this messaging, just to reassert our confidence in what it means to be a vegan? So I'm quite sort of upfront about some of the emotional challenges of what it means to be a vegan. How do we navigate living in a world where the people we love are the ones engaging in this thing that we're standing against? Because I think if we don't acknowledge those things, people feel isolated when they experience it themselves. And I think everyone who's a vegan, especially sort of an ethical animal rights vegan, we've all had that moment where we've seen someone we love eat a piece of steak, or eat a piece of chicken, or eat some fish, or we've gone to a restaurant, or we've walked past a butcher shop. I think we've all had that moment where we sort of see that, or we're around that, and it hurts us. And even if we are compassionate to people and understanding of people's behavior, and we don't make it the fault of the consumer, even if we live by those principles, it doesn't mean it doesn't hurt us. And I think if we don't sort of acknowledge some of those emotional challenges, it means that when someone feels that way, they might feel like there's something wrong with them, or that they're not the one, they're not being vegan in the right way, and then that can be quite hard for people. So I think we've got to, as a vegan community, we've got to sort of share those experiences, speak them through with one another to validate what it means to be a vegan in a non-vegan world. And the hardest thing about being vegan is not getting protein or finding tofu or eating a delicious plant-based meal. I think it's some of those more sort of core emotional, psychological challenges of just being reminded of the problem on a daily basis, turning on the TV, seeing an advert, spending time with a loved one and having to share a meal with them where they're eating something that's not vegan. So how do we live with that? How do we kind of cope through that? And I think that's sort of one of the core messages of this book as well. Because it's not just about being vegan for 4 months, it's 4 years, it's 40 years. It's like, how do we keep extending that time so that we make a commitment today that feels palatable to us, but ultimately ends up being a commitment that we stick at for hopefully the rest of our lives.
Yeah, that's a really powerful message and a really needed message too. I've been vegan for 16 or so years at this point, but I still have those moments where I recently went to a party at a friend's house, and they were doing a shrimp boil, which I wasn't aware of until I got there. And so there are shrimp that are being thrown into boiling water, and I am like physically, feeling a reaction to it, and just I couldn't be around it, and everyone else is having a great time and just relaxed and merry, and you start to feel like you're not fit to live in this world. And that's a hard thing. It gives you this sense of distance from the people you care about. So, it still comes up many years in. And I think this message and this psychological challenge, emotional challenge is very real. So, yeah, I'm glad you put this out into the world.
Thank you. Thank you.
So you've been doing this work for many years now, quite intensively. And when you look at where we are now in the world, what gives you hope? What makes you feel like we're headed in the right direction?
It's interesting, isn't it? I think the way that you look at the world can really be quite paradoxical, because there are so many problems in the world. So many problems, and I think sometimes it can feel kind of overwhelming to sort of think about everything that's happening. And I think sometimes what gets lost in that is that there are lots of small things happening all the time as well. And I think about the vegan things specifically, the vegan movement specifically. And one of the things that I've been trying to do, maybe in the past couple of years, more so, is try and see the change that's happening on smaller levels, rather than thinking about veganism being, a vegan world, and that being my sort of core goal. I'm thinking about, can I derive positivity and sort of happiness from things like greyhound racing being stopped in certain places, or the end of bullfighting in certain cities, or the end of captivity of cetaceans in certain countries and certain cities and such. Can I sort of see all these small victories and these small wins that are happening all around the world that are building us up to being a more compassionate world for animals? And that's one thing that I've been doing that I think has really made me feel more positive about things. Because I think if we go, oh, how's veganism doing? It can be quite challenging because we don't know all the numbers, and that the world is farming more animals in more intensive ways, and it can feel like a bit of a losing battle if we sort of frame it on a global perspective of a vegan world. How do we get there? But if we just sort of focus on more achievable tasks, we can build up things, little by little, step by step. So that's why I've been getting a lot of positivity from just sort of looking at all of these great things that are happening all over the world. But they're sort of happening in maybe localized or isolated situations, but they're all emblematic of a changing attitude towards animals. And whether it's bullfighting being banned somewhere in South America, or greyhound racing being phased out in the UK, whatever it may be, it's all symbolic of just progress happening little by little, and that brings me a lot of happiness, especially during those darker days. Yeah,
there is a lot to be optimistic about, and at the same time, it can feel like an uphill battle sometimes. And the burnout risk, I think, in our movement is real. What are some of the ways that you take care of yourself?
I mean, yeah, burnout it is a real thing, and this is again part of like, how do we stay vegan? We have to be mindful of how we're feeling and not feel shame for taking a step back from certain things at times. So that's one thing I try and do. Just make time for your other hobbies. You know, when I first started advocating, when I first became vegan, I became so passionate so quickly that it sort of became who I was. You know, I wasn't Ed, the guy with all these different hobbies who was a person before being vegan. It was like, I'm Ed the vegan, right? And I need to let everyone know about veganism. I want to get out there and talk about it. And it kind of defined me entirely in terms of my perception of myself. And I feel like when I sort of retained a bit more of a balance in terms of who I am outside of veganism, it allowed me to become a better advocate, because it helped me avoid some of that burnout and some of that guilt that I would sometimes experience if I decided that, I'm not going to go to this event, or I'm not going to do this or do that. Sometimes I'd be racked with that guilt of going, well, if you don't go, then you've missed out on this chance to turn someone vegan, and now they're going to kill more animals, and it'll be your fault for not being there. And you just, it becomes quite suffocating. So I think it's about trying to maintain a sense of who we are outside of veganism, beyond veganism. You know, veganism might be something that defines us. It might be something that defines one of the most defining things about us, but it's not the only thing that defines us. So, you know, I like to watch films. You know, my passion has always been films. I love cinema. I love movies. I did before I was vegan. I still do now. So I just make time to watch more films, music, going out with friends, going for a walk, you know, really simple things. It doesn't have to be this big thing. Just the things you like, make time for them. It could be playing video games. It could be making music. It could be going to gigs and shows. Whatever it is, reading, just make time for those things, and don't feel guilty if you don't have a conversation with someone. Don't feel bad if you go to a family meal and veganism isn't brought up. You know, you might be eating your plant-based meal, but it might not be discussed, and that's okay. You know, that's more than okay. Sometimes that's the best thing, to just be a person in the company of other people eating something that's plant-based, and they might be eating something that's not plant-based, and it might not be a topic of conversation, but you being there doing that is having an impact. And you know, things like that I think can be really powerful. So just take time, take a step away from this sort of vegan world, not by not being vegan, but just by sort of detaching and making time for the other things that define who you are. If you have some vegan friends, that can be really helpful. Hang out with those vegan friends. You don't even have to talk about being vegan. You can just hang out with them like you would any other group of friends. Go to the cinema, do whatever it is you want to do, but just being around people who you feel connected with on that sort of core ethical level can be really helpful, even if it's not a topic of conversation. I think all of those things can really help, and they help me, especially in those times where I can feel like I'm getting a little bit sort of too deep in some of those feelings and those negative emotions. You take a step back, you make time for who you are outside of veganism, you reconnect with people, you go outside, go for walks, go to an animal sanctuary, spend some time with animals, just ground yourself a little bit.
Yeah, that's really refreshing and really, really good advice. And I know a lot of Veganuary team members will be listening to this episode, because you have a lot of fans here at Veganuary. So I hope all of my team takes that to heart too, and really makes time during this busy campaign season to enjoy their lives and enjoy their hobbies. But yeah, that's great advice. So beyond the book launch, is there anything you're working on right now that you're feeling really excited about, and what should we be watching out for?
That is a good question. I think so. I've just been away. I did a speaking tour in South Korea and Japan. So I've been doing a lot of public speaking, which I really, really love. But it also has meant that I've not been uploading as much content, and I've not been doing some of my other pieces of work. So I'm kind of looking to just get into a bit of a groove in a way. And it's not particularly exciting or a really big thing to be able to tell you about, but I'm just looking forward to sort of being able just to be in a place and get into a groove of writing and making content and uploading videos and podcast episodes and such. So that's kind of what I'm going to be focusing on now for a little while. I'll have some other things lined up next year at some point, but I'm not 100% sure when that'll be. Some other speaking arrangements and some speaking events. But between sort of now and the end of January, it's going to be mostly work on my new book that's coming out. I've got a few events coming up in January, some book events for that release. And then obviously I'll have some work to do around the release, hopefully, as well. So it's just more of the same, which is kind of nice just to get back into that groove. And then when I get into the new year, I'll be able to look at it and sort of work out maybe what those bigger, more quote unquote exciting things might be.
When in someone's Veganuary journey would you recommend that they pick up your book? Would it make sense on day 1 when they're first trying it out, or would it be better on day 31 when they're thinking about where to from here?
Well, I think this is a bit of a non-answer. I think either is absolutely fine, because the book kind of goes through the whole process, so to speak. So it could be before you've even considered going vegan, maybe, you know, or before you've set a date down to go vegan. So it could be, I'm thinking about it, should I, shouldn't I? You know, then that would be an acceptable time to read the book. But it could be day 1, because a lot of what I'm speaking about is very much relevant to that initial point where you've just made the change. But then a lot of what I talk about is also for beyond that point. Maybe it is day 31. You want to stay being vegan after Veganuary. You've enjoyed it. You want to keep going. That's not the end of that journey, so to speak. And the book sort of goes beyond that as well, and sort of discusses what the next things might be. And it's also a book that's useful for if you've been vegan for maybe even years, because I talk about dating, I talk about family, I talk about raising children, I talk about companion animals, so dogs and cats. I talk about some of those emotional things that we've already discussed. So even if you've been vegan for a while and you're thinking, oh, is it ethical to get a cat or a dog? What do I feed them? What about raising a child, but my partner's not vegan? How do I approach that? What sort of way should I speak to them about that? Is it even healthy to raise a child on a plant-based diet? So even if you've been vegan for a little while, there might be still some of these questions. I talk about sort of secondhand clothes. You know, is it ethical to buy secondhand clothes that are animal derived? You know, what about some of these other questions that might be only relevant once you've been vegan for a little while and are quite solidified in that veganism? So I know it's not a particularly concrete answer, but essentially, hopefully it's a book that's relevant for people all along that spectrum of the vegan experience.
Yeah, it sounds like it'd be a great companion at any point in the journey, really.
I hope so, exactly. That's the phrase that I was looking for.
So for someone listening right now who's considering going vegan, or who's maybe in their first week of Veganuary and feeling a little bit overwhelmed, you've already given so much amazing advice and wisdom on this podcast, but if you could just give them one short piece of advice, what's the thing you would most want them to hear? Simplify
it. You know, don't overwhelm yourself by thinking, I'm vegan now for the rest of my life. Every day is going to be like this. Simplify it, one meal at a time. Just commit to having a plant-based breakfast, then a plant-based lunch, then a plant-based dinner. Just one meal at a time. And the thing is, if you slip up, don't view it as, oh, I failed, I've ruined my Veganuary, I've got to start back on day 1. Just pick it up again at the next meal. Because maybe you have a plant-based breakfast and you go out with some friends, and for whatever reason, you end up eating something that's not plant-based for lunch. And then you might feel shame and you might feel guilt. And you're like, oh, I failed. But you haven't failed. You just, when it gets to dinner, those 4 or 5 hours later, have a plant-based dinner and you're right back on track. And to just simplify it down, one meal at a time, and don't overburden yourself. And if you make a mistake, while we want to avoid that, of course we want to avoid it. The important thing is, what do you then do at the next meal? And that's where you can recommit to something and build up that confidence within yourself again.
I love that. I often compare it to yoga or meditation, and that if you couldn't get into a pose, or if your mind wandered, you wouldn't say, well, I'm not a yogi, well, I'm not a meditator, right? It's a practice, and you can just keep coming back until it feels natural. And I think we could use a lot more of that approach when it comes to veganism too.
I think you're absolutely right. And it's sometimes, let's say that you eat 30 plant-based meals. So you've been eating plant-based for 10 days. And then on meal 31, you slip up because of a family or social environment, and you go, I've failed. But actually, you've eaten plant-based 30 out of 31 meals, right? That doesn't sound like a failure to me. That sounds like you've done something really fantastic. And then at meal 32, you can just get back on that track. So it's just about how we frame things and that perspective that we have, and ultimately that compassion we have for ourselves. Obviously, we want to hold ourselves accountable. We want to set ourselves up to succeed, but you know, life isn't always a perfect straight line. And if we do make a mistake or we do slip up, the question is, what do we do from that point? And that's when we can get back on the train and keep going.
Yeah, it's a great reminder. So I warned you, we always bookend with food questions. So we have 3 to close us out on. So the first is, what is your favorite place to eat out?
Good question. I am a sucker for Mildred's.
Love Mildred's.
Yeah, Mildred's is probably the place I go to the most. So I'd have to say Mildred's.
I think we've heard Mildred's more than once on the podcast.
I'm sure. But I also do have to give an honourable mention to Unity Diner in London and a restaurant called No Catch in Brighton.
Yeah, Unity's fish and chips is top of the list.
Absolutely.
What's your food vice? Is there a super indulgent treat that you just can't keep yourself away from?
Crisps. I'm a sucker for crisps. You know, nothing feels more comforting than a big bag of crisps to watch for a film or something. So I have a strict 0 crisp policy rule because as soon as I open that bag, it's not going to be over until it's empty.
Same, but when you travel, I also always find it very fun to find all of the different like crisp flavors that are popular in other countries. There's always something wild out there that you would never imagine.
Oh gosh, we have a brand in London at least. It's fried egg flavored.
Really?
It's tastes. And honestly, the ingredients are plant based, but it actually tastes like fried egg. And I know that sounds weird, but it is legitimately delicious.
Huh. I'll look him up next time I'm in London.
There you
go. Where can people follow you and find out more about your work if they're not already?
Yeah, so my handle is Earthling Ed. You can find me on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook. I also have a Substack, which is Ed Winters, and I have a podcast called The Disclosure Podcast.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Wendy. It's been a real pleasure, and I appreciate you speaking with me. And it's been really nice.
All right, Wendy, that was a great interview with Earthling Ed. I guess you got on really well with him?
Oh, he was incredible to talk to. I really enjoyed that conversation.
Good. Right. I've come up with some random talking points for us around food. I'm just going to have a look at my list and just pick one at random and see if it prompts anything exciting from us. So,
I love it.
What's your go-to takeaway or takeout?
So I live in the middle of nowhere right now. I'm in a town with about 10,000 people, very few restaurants. So takeaway isn't a big part of my life these days. But there is one pizza place in town, wood-fired pizza, that has vegan cheese. So if I'm going to get takeout, I get a pie. And I love a pizza with lots of veggies and lots of spicy things on it.
Oh, nice.
What about you?
Do you know, near me, we've got a vegan Chinese takeaway, and it's really, really good. And it's quite sort of junk foody. It's lots of meat alternatives and in like nice creamy sauce and noodles. So it's not something you'd have that often because it doesn't feel the healthiest. But if you're having takeaway, you're not really bothered about it being healthy, are you? And I just love that. I can't even remember what it's called though, but it's delicious. It's really, really nice. But I would normally go for something, Asian, like East Asian, Japanese or Chinese or Korean. Yeah. So, Wendy, how can people contact us?
Well, Stu, they can email us at podcast@veganuary.com. And of course, you'll find Veganuary on all of the major social media channels.
And how can people take part in Veganuary?
They can visit veganuary.com and opt in to receive our 31 days of coaching emails that are packed with tips and tricks and recipes. And all we ask in return is that you share your name, country, and email address.
Brilliant. This podcast was recorded at Distorted Podcast Studios and produced by Jim Moore at Bloody Vegans Productions. If you enjoyed it, please do subscribe and rate us 5 stars, of course. Thank you very much. See you next time.
1